Welcome to Media Melanie TV. Today I'm back to talk about Maxton Hall Season 2 on Prime Video. Today's topic is going to be whether or not Percy, the driver for the Beauforts, could potentially be James and Lydia's biological father. I'm going to get into some of the arguments for and against, but I would love if you chime in with your thoughts and theories. Each week, I'm going to be here with 3 videos for Maxton Hall. First, an episode review. I did put out my review of the first 3 episodes of the season, and then a next episode preview, and also a theory and discussion video just like this one. Be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the Maxton Hall content, because you know what? There are only 6 episodes this season, so let's savor every single James and Ruby and Maxton Hall second that we possibly can. All right, first and foremost, when I first binged this show, in my mind, I thought there's no way that Percy could not be their father. And right off the top, I'm just going to say I have not read the books. I know in the books this is not a canon thing, but because they have taken some other liberties, I'm wondering, could they be adding this extra layer of dramatic tension for the sake of television? It is definitely not unheard of. These adaptations are not always true to the book. So even if you have read the books, yes, I'm aware that this is not a thing there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true here for the TV series. I think first and foremost is Percy is very protective of the twins. And yes, that could just be because he's been with them for a long time, he's been with the family and whatnot. But on the other hand, he could just be seething inside when he sees the way Mortimer treats them, especially James. There's that season 1 moment when Percy steps in the middle after Mortimer hits James. Again, it could just be overprotective, or it could just be because he's a nice human and doesn't want to see somebody get hit, especially by their father. Or it could be that he is so angry that Mortimer is hitting James because this is actually his flesh and blood. But it could also be that there was this forbidden relationship between he and Cordelia, because Cordelia is in fact a Beaufort. What gets me is the fact that Mortimer's last name is also Beaufort, but we know for a fact that this business is from Cordelia's family. So also, Mortimer must have taken her last name, which is kind of interesting to me and maybe even slightly emasculating, although from what I've heard in the English culture, this is definitely not something that's unheard of. But it just also kind of feeds into this sense of entitlement that Mortimer feels being the big, powerful head of this family. And now that Cordelia is gone, how is that going to leave him? Is Ophelia going to get some sort of control after the reading of the will? That's something we haven't seen yet, but they've alluded to it. So that kind of makes me think maybe Mortimer's going to have to step down from power, or at least cede some level of control over to Lydia and James, which he doesn't seem to want to do, especially for Lydia. The fact that when the press questioned her and called her an outsider and asked, do you have to go between James and Mortimer or whatever? Lydia has proven that not only does she want to do this, but she's quite capable of it. And hopefully by the end of the season, or at least the end of the series, we will see Lydia in a significant position of power, not just leading young Beaufort, but leading Beaufort as a whole. All right, another clue that I think Percy could most definitely be the biological father. Some of his facial expressions, he says a lot on his face and in his eyes without actually using dialogue. And sometimes that can definitely be a device where if you read between the lines, there is more to the story. And this story, I personally do think that he absolutely could be their father. There's also this shot in season 1 where they frame it in a way where you can see the structure and profile of both James and Percy's faces side by side. And for me, there is quite a resemblance here. Now, I'm also going to get into a little bit of why this may not be a thing after, but first going to continue going through the clues that I think can potentially lead us to believe that this is in fact true. Let's also talk about the meaningful looks and glances exchanged between Percy and Cordelia before the twins end up going off to Oxford. Now, it could just be because, they've known each other a long time. He's been with the family and is endeared towards the kids. Or it could be that they did have this forbidden relationship. There are some lines of dialogue between James and Cordelia in episode 5 that for me are giving Percy and Cordelia. In Eye of the Storm, James wakes up all hungover, and Cordelia is there with some antacid trying to help him to wake up. And the way that this conversation goes, James says, "Have you ever wished you were someone else?" And Cordelia says, "Yes, I think everybody has sometimes." And then James says, "Were you unhappy?" And Cordelia says, "I was unhappily in love. I think everyone reaches a point in life where they more or less know who they are, and they stop going after things that don't fit." Hello, Percy, the driver for the family. She says, "I threw myself into work. I became a mother." And also just the timing of where she dropped, she became a mother into the conversation after this relationship. She could have already been pregnant and then she became a mother, but ended up having a different father figure because she was potentially forced to marry Mortimer. And then James asks, "What about him?" And she says he followed a different path. Sometimes people make each other unhappy no matter how much they love each other, and it's just better to let go. Did the show directly tell us that Cordelia and Percy were involved in a relationship? Why have this conversation if there's not going to be a callback, unless it is just for the sake of James and Ruby and their storyline and creating some sort of relatability and an important, meaningful conversation between Cordelia and James before she ends up passing away? And then James says, "What if it hurts so much letting go?" And then she says, "You can handle more than you think if what you believe are doing is right." Now, if it is Cordelia and Percy, she believed the right thing to do was not stay with him. And let's say she was pregnant. It was early on in the pregnancy. Because she does carry this name that comes with a lot of privilege and is very elite within the society, it was probably something that could never be, especially at a time when, social circles were even more prominently divided than they are now. It seems to me, though, that she chose her family's image and what she thinks is right for the family, for the business, and didn't end up choosing herself and ended up potentially in a forced marriage with Mortimer. Now, if this is actually a thing and Percy is the dad, could Lydia being pregnant with twins be mirroring the situation between Cordelia and Percy? Will there be a payoff where it comes out and maybe even Mortimer knows, and this is why he treats the twins so poorly, because he knows he's not their biological father and he knows it is the driver? Not that there's anything wrong with being a driver. Hey, we all have to work. I have a lot of respect for blue-collar jobs. I grew up in a blue-collar family myself. But within these class divides, it is definitely frowned upon, especially for the upper echelon to be involved with the help. And when Cordelia would have come to her dad, another powerful Beaufort, and said, "Look, I'm pregnant with the twins," maybe she didn't even say who it was. Maybe they just knew or had seen them together. Or maybe she pretended it was somebody else that may not necessarily be worthy. Maybe she pretended it was Mortimer. We don't know a lot about Mortimer's past, but we do know he took the Beaufort last name. So did he see this as a power play in order to insert himself within this elitist family to be able to control the business and become a part of this, and didn't really care about the kids in the first place, which, he makes very clear that he really doesn't have an emotional connection with either of them. In fact, he is just such a jerk and a bad guy. They do a great job creating him as this evil character. He's physically abusive. He's verbally abusive. All he cares about are appearances. And that could also harken back to potentially what Cordelia's father expressed was important to him for his daughter, to end up with somebody that is more respectable and not somebody who is just a driver. And again, I have no problems with drivers, blue collar, any of that. I'm just commenting on the way things are within these social circles. Now let's talk about some counter arguments. First and foremost, as I had mentioned, this is not a canon thing. Within Mona Caston's 3 books, Percy is most definitely not the biological father. But also that doesn't mean they can't change the course of the story for the sake of television, which often does require added dramatic tension, emotional layers, payoffs, mirroring of storylines. There's a lot of different elements that go into the TV show. So, I'm just not ruling it out simply because it was not a thing within the books. And by the way, again, I have not read the Save Me trilogy. I probably will end up reading it maybe before season 3, which has already been renewed. And actually, the books were just translated into English recently, so now they are available. And I'm curious, how many of you actually have read the books? How many of you are just approaching this as a TV show? Drop it in the comments and let me know. Then there's the fact of the casting of Percy. It appears that this character is of Asian descent, potentially Korean. And I will say that both James and Lydia are giving very blonde Caucasian vibes. But there's something about the facial structure for me, specifically between James and Percy, that does kind of make me think, okay, I mean, it's definitely possible. You never know how genes work out. So they could have just gotten lucky, I guess lucky from the perception of the Beauforts, that maybe the twins don't necessarily look like Percy, but are still his children. There's also the fact that a lot of these wealthier families may not have strong emotional connections with their children. They're busy. A lot of them send their kids to boarding school. And while Maxton Hall is not a boarding school, it's very clear that there is not a very strong emotional connection between Mortimer and the children. There does seem to have been more love between Cordelia and the twins. And maybe that is because Mortimer's not the biological father. It could just be that because Percy has been with the family for a long time, if he's been with them for about 20 years, he has established this close connection and he just doesn't necessarily like the way the kids are treated, regardless of if he is the father or not. And if he's not, again, it could just be he is a good human being who doesn't like to see people treated poorly and steps in because it's just the right thing to do. But then I guess what gets me is if there was this relationship and Cordelia and Percy did love each other, why would he stay on to torture himself every single day having to see Cordelia and the kids? Now there's two sides to that. It could be difficult and he's literally just torturing himself every single day. But if he is a good person, maybe he just wants to have proximity so he can see them grow up. And he can insert himself in certain situations to be the father figure that Mortimer is not. And then just going back to the fact that it seems that Mortimer took the Beaufort last name. Now, I did mention the word emasculating. It could be that this was quite emasculating for Mortimer to take the last name, but it could also be he doesn't actually care because he married up, wants the wealth, wants the power. So that could actually go in either direction. And this could also be why he is just so obsessed with controlling the family business, the narrative, and their reputation, because there is this undercurrent of him not being biologically related to the children that will eventually take over the business. Now, this reminds me a lot of The Buccaneers. Now, this is a young adult teen drama that is on Apple TV. It is going into its third season, just been renewed. And if you like Maxton Hall, you will probably love The Buccaneers. There's just this same sense of yearning. There are some storylines about illegitimate children and, how that impacts positions of power within England. This, of course, is set back in the late 1800s, so the time period is a little bit different. But if you like The Summer I Turned Pretty and you like the show, which obviously you must because you're here watching the video, highly recommend going to check out Buccaneers. And I do have some reviews and content here up on the channel for that show as well. And then at one point, there's also an interesting remark that James makes to his dad. He makes a comment that says, "How did you manage to pretend to be from a higher social class for all these years?" And that could just be because, yes, he married up and maybe he was forced to marry Cordelia to cover up the fact that she got pregnant from the driver. Or maybe there's more layers to that. And maybe it is somehow alluding to the fact that Percy is in fact the father and that really Mortimer is not much better than Percy. He just ended up landing in this position because he maybe had slightly better social standing or was connected with the right people. Even if he wasn't quite up there on that same Beaufort tier as Cordelia, there could be a lot more in common between Percy and Mortimer than expected. And even if Percy is the father, Mortimer may not know it's him. He may just know that Cordelia was pregnant by somebody else. Or I guess even depending on the timing of it all, maybe Mortimer does think he's the biological father and he's just a complete jerk and this is the way he treats his kids. But if the timing was close enough, could they have played it off as though these were Mortimer's kids and he never questioned it? Or could it be the situation where it's kind of like lurking in the back of his head that it could be a fact, but he just doesn't have the evidence to prove it either way? That said, being in this position of power, you would think you could probably grab a hair, toothbrush, whatever from the kids and do a little DNA testing. But maybe if he actually knew, that would propel him in a whole different direction. And honestly, I don't think it really matters what Mortimer wants or Mortimer feels anyway, because once they read this will, and Ophelia has made it a point to mention the will, Maybe Mortimer's going to be taken out of power. And is there a world in which, let's say that does happen, Percy will be able to come forward and out himself? Is Cordelia's dad even still alive? I don't believe we saw the grandparents at the funeral. So if they're not alive and there's no more like reputation to really uphold, maybe they could at least have a relationship in private, even if it ends up not being a public thing. And then let's also just talk about the fact that Mortimer hates Ruby and is doing literally everything he can in his power to prevent James from being with her. And could it be that he's just too familiar with that feeling? Maybe he didn't come from a wealthy family and he actually relates to Ruby and doesn't want to see his son ending up with somebody like him because he is a self-deprecating person. And maybe he just feels like he needs to fiercely protect this like adopted wealth and power status because that is all he has and he doesn't respect Ruby. The fact that when James gave that speech at the gala and he whisked him away and was like, I better not hear you saying that again. And, Beauforts don't cry. Like, bro, you're not even a true Beaufort. Who do you even think you are in the first place? I hate that he doesn't want James to be with her because Ruby is smart. Yeah, she may not have the same standing, but she's going to Oxford. She goes to Maxton Hall. She's proven herself as a leader and a very effective student. So I hate that Mortimer hates Ruby. But again, they've done such a good job developing these storylines to make us hate Mortimer and hate the fact that he is doing this to his son. Or maybe not biological son. I don't know. And then again, this I've mentioned before too, the fact that Lydia is pregnant with the twins and it could be mirroring that storyline. What if Mortimer forces Lydia to get into an arranged marriage? And obviously she's not going to end up with Sutton because A, he's going to be the headmaster and it would be quite frowned upon if it was discovered that she ended up sleeping with her professor. Obviously that would not be very good for the family image as well. Or what if Mortimer finds out and gets so pissed that he ends up outing Sutton as the father and he loses his position and standing? Now, don't get me wrong. I do not support professors sleeping with children. Ruby did try to justify it basically by saying, things started out in this way. We didn't even have any physical contact, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But also just in general, I mean, she's not 18 years old and yeah, she's over the age of 16 of consent, but I just think it is icky, the teacher-student dynamic, and I don't think it should ever happen. And again, I'm not saying it's right, but I do think Mortimer could use that to his advantage and oust him out of there, which obviously would drive Lydia even further away. If this is a case of history repeating itself, I think it would be very interesting if they are making this canon for the TV show and switching it up from the book, because it's going to subvert our expectations if all the book readers are like, no, because it's not a thing in the books. Well, it could be, and actually, I'm really here for that. And really, this would be a great cliffhanger going into season 3. So altogether, what do you guys think? Is it possible that Percy could be the biological father or maybe not so much? Definitely let me know down in the comments. I think this is something we will continue to discuss. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to have an eagle eye on the screen to see what other little interactions we can pick up. And who knows, maybe I missed something. If I did, please let me know down below as well. Also, I appreciate you tuning in. Like I said, I'm here 3 times a week with Maxton Hall videos, reviews, next episode previews, and theories. If there's any theory that you have and you'd like me to discuss, also drop it down below. I am happy to take different topics. I love feedback more than anything, so please let me know. And obviously, I will give you a shout out for any theories that you do throw out there. All right, I'll be back again soon with more TV talk. Media Melanie, clicking off.